The sun was hot that Wednesday afternoon at Nko Umweze market. The noise of traders filled the air, people shouting prices, women calling customers, wheelbarrow pushers arguing over space. In the middle of all the noise sat a quiet, pale-looking girl named Chison. She had a big iron basin placed on top of 2 blocks. Inside the basin were snails, fresh, fat, shining snails that caught the eyes of anyone passing. While other traders were busy shouting, "Buy your fresh snail here!" Chison just sat silently on a small wooden stool, her wrapper loosely tied around her waist. She hardly smiled, and her eyes always looked tired, like someone who didn't sleep well at night. Many people in the market had noticed her, not because she was talkative or friendly, but because her snails were always the best. Some wondered where a young girl like her got such big snails. Others whispered that maybe she went deep into the bush at night to find them, but Chison never explained. She just minded her business quietly. Every Saturday morning, a wealthy woman named Madame Ifeoma would come to the market. She was in her mid-40s, tall, neat, and always wore fine lace wrappers and gold earrings that shone in the sun. She was married to Mr. Chukudi, a respected man who worked with a big oil company. They lived in a beautiful house at Hilltop Estate, drove big cars, and owned several shops. But despite their wealth, they had no child. They had tried everything: prayers, hospitals, herbalists, but nothing worked. Madame Ifeoma often felt lonely at home, especially when she saw other women's children playing around. Over time, Madame Ifeoma became one of Chison's most loyal customers. She loved snails, and she never bought from anyone else. She said Chison's snails were always clean and fresh. Each time she came, she would sit a bit at his stall talking to Chison. The girl would answer with soft "yes ma" and "no ma." She never talked too much, but something about her quietness made Madame Ifeoma feel pity. One particular day, after buying her usual snails, Madame Ifeoma noticed that Chison looked even more exhausted than usual. Her hair was rough, her wrapper was faded, and her slippers were worn out. "My dear, why do you always look so tired?" Madame Ifeoma asked gently. Chison kept quiet for a moment, then sighed. "I sleep in the market most nights, ma. I don't really have anywhere else to stay. I live with a distant uncle, but he doesn't care. I just manage here." Madame Ifeoma's heart softened. She looked at the girl again, and this time she didn't just see a snail seller. She saw a lonely, suffering child. That night, when she got home, she couldn't stop thinking about Chison. At dinner, she told her husband, "I saw that girl again today, the one that sells snails at Nko Market. Honestly, Chukudi, the girl is suffering. She has no body. She sleeps in the market. She's too young for this kind of life." Her husband looked at her from across the table. "So, what do you want to do?" Madame Ifeoma hesitated. "I want to bring her here. She can stay with us, help me with some things in the house. At least she will have a roof over her head. Maybe God will use her presence to bless us." Mr. Chukudi thought for a while. "If that's what you want, fine, but make sure she behaves herself. You know how people are these days." The next morning, Madame Ifeoma returned to the market earlier than usual. She found Chison sitting quietly, already arranging her snails. "Chison," she called, sitting beside her. "What would you say if I told you I want you to come and live with me and my husband?" Chison raised her eyes slowly. She didn't look excited or surprised. She just stared quietly, then nodded. "Thank you, ma," she said softly. Within 2 days, Madame Ifeoma had arranged everything. She bought Chison new clothes, shoes, and toiletries. The girl packed her small bag, just a few old clothes, a wrapper, and a nylon bag tied at a corner, and followed Madame Ifeoma to her home. When they arrived at Hilltop Estate, the security guard opened the gate. Chison entered the compound slowly, looking around. The house was massive, with white walls, a flower garden, a water tank, and a wide veranda. Madame Ifeoma introduced her to the housekeeper and the driver. Everyone looked at her with curiosity. In the first few weeks, everything seemed normal. Chison woke up early, swept the compound, helped Madame Ifeoma in the kitchen, washed plates, and ran errands. She was quiet and obedient. She never argued. She never complained. She didn't make friends in the neighborhood. She always stayed indoors except when she followed Madame Ifeoma to church or her office. Madame Ifeoma didn't put her in school. Instead, she registered her at a tailoring shop close to the estate so she could learn sewing. In the mornings, after house chores, Chison would walk to the tailor's shop, sit quietly with other apprentices, and spend the day learning how to sew skirts, blouses, and wrappers. She wasn't the playful type. She focused on her work silently, watching others more than talking. One thing everyone noticed was that Chison never ate snail, even when Madame Ifeoma cooked it. She always said, "I don't eat it, ma. It makes me uncomfortable." Madame Ifeoma didn't think much of it. Little by little, Madame Ifeoma started treating her like a daughter. She bought her new dresses, took her to the salon, gave her pocket money, and even allowed her to follow her to the office sometimes when she wasn't at the tailoring shop. The neighbors began to talk. Some praised Madame Ifeoma's kindness. Others whispered that you don't know people these days. You just carried somebody from the market inside your house. But Madame Ifeoma didn't listen. She was happy. Mr. Chukwudi was also pleased that his wife finally had someone around to keep her company. What nobody knew was that Chison's arrival marked the quiet beginning of a storm that would slowly tear their peaceful home apart. But for now, everything appeared calm. Chison continued to live with them, silently watching, silently waiting. The house was quiet that night. The clock ticked slowly, and the air outside was cool and still. Everyone inside the mansion was fast asleep. Madame Ifeoma and her husband lay on their bed, tired from the day's work, not knowing that the peace in their home was about to be broken. Inside the guest room, Chison lay on her mattress, pretending to be asleep. Her eyes were wide open, fixed on the window. Her breathing was calm, but her heart was beating slowly like a drum. She waited patiently for the sound that only she could hear. Then it came. A distant low whistle, almost like the hiss of a crawling creature, floated into the room. She smiled. That was the signal. Slowly, Chison sat up on the bed. She looked around carefully to make sure no one was watching. Then she stood up, faced the window, and closed her eyes. Her body began to change. Her hands and legs bent and folded in an unnatural way. Her back cracked as a thick snail shell grew from her spine, wrapping around her body like armor. Her face, however, remained human, the same calm, innocent face everyone saw in the daytime. But her eyes glowed faintly like whetstones under the moonlight. Her lower body twisted into the slimy shape of a giant snail. She was half girl, half snail now. Her face was human, but her body was not. Without making a sound, she moved to the window and pushed it open slowly. The hinges didn't creak. She had done this many times before. She lifted her human snail body and slid out of the window, landing gently on the wet ground. Her skin glistened as she began to crawl across the compound. She didn't walk, she crept like a snail, leaving behind a thin trail of slime that disappeared after a few seconds. When she got close to the gate, she paused and tilted her head to the sky. Suddenly, one snail appeared at the gate, then another and another. One after the other, snails began to crawl into the compound from different corners of the fence. Their shells were bigger than normal, and their movements were faster than ordinary snails. These were not ordinary creatures. They gathered near the gate in a tight circle. The snails hissed softly, their bodies glistening in the dim light. The air around them grew cold and heavy. Then from the shadows, their leader appeared, a massive snail with red lines on its shell and eyes that shone like fire. When it spoke, its voice was neither human nor animal. "Chison! Chison!" the leader hissed. "You have wasted enough time." Chison bowed her head slightly. "Forgive me, great one. I was waiting for the right night," she whispered, her human mouth moving strangely against her snail body. The leader moved closer, its shell scratching the gate as it approached. "No more waiting. The house you entered is rich. Their blood is clean. We must begin the work now before they suspect you." Chison nodded slowly. Her eyes darkened as if something else was now inside her. The other snails began to chant in a strange language, their voices rising and falling like the night wind. The air in the compound suddenly grew colder. Dogs in the neighborhood started barking for no reason. Chison joined the circle, her human face twisted into a wicked smile as she lifted her hands to the sky. Her snail body glistened brighter. It was the beginning of their evil plan. The leader hissed again, louder this time, shaking the gate. "Tomorrow night you begin. Do not fail us, or your shell will be crushed." With that, the snails slowly melted back into the darkness. One by one, they disappeared through cracks and corners like smoke.
Chison turned around and crawled back towards the window. She slipped inside quietly, her body returning to normal. The shell folded back into her skin. Her legs straightened. She climbed into her bed, pulled the bedsheet over herself, and closed her eyes as if nothing had happened. By morning, no one in the house would know that something evil had gathered at their gates. The next morning came with bright sunshine, birds singing around the estate, and the usual sound of cars leaving for work. Madame Ifeoma stood in the kitchen, making tea and preparing breakfast for her husband before he left for the office. Chison moved around quietly, sweeping and mopping the parlor as if she had spent the whole night peacefully sleeping like everyone else. Her face was calm, her eyes were gentle, but deep inside, her mind was fixed on the words of the leader from the night before. "Tomorrow night you begin," and so she did. That evening, after everyone had eaten and retired to their rooms, Chison sat alone outside on the veranda, pretending to be adjusting the mop stick. She watched the compound carefully. Her eyes followed Madame Ifeoma's husband as he entered his car to quickly pick something from a friend's house. She watched Madame Ifeoma close her bedroom door to pray. She memorized every movement in that house like someone drawing a map. That night, she waited again, not to crawl out, but to begin her work inside. Sometime around midnight, the entire house grew unusually cold. Madame Ifeoma woke up shivering. The windows were closed, the fan was off, yet the air felt like it came from a cold cave. She rubbed her arms and turned to wake her husband, but he was fast asleep, snoring lightly. She decided to go check the generator room to see if something was wrong. But as she was about to step out of the room, she froze. Right in the hallway, she saw a trail of fresh snail slime glistening under the security bulb. It stretched from the guest room down to the kitchen door. Her heart skipped. "Snail," she whispered to herself, confused. How did Snail enter the house? She tiptoed closer, looked at the trail again, then shook her head. "Maybe from outside," she said nervously. She cleaned it with tissue and went back to the room, forcing herself to believe it was nothing. She didn't want to wake her husband over something so small. Meanwhile, in the guest room, Chison lay on her bed, smiling in the darkness. She had made sure that slime disappeared after a few minutes, just like always. The next day, strange things started happening. Mr. Chukwudi went to work as usual, but by afternoon, he called home with panic in his voice. "Ifeoma, something is wrong. There's an unexpected query waiting for me at the office. They said some files under my name are missing. I don't understand it." Madame Ifeoma was shocked. Her husband was a careful man, respected by everyone. Losing important documents was unlike him. They both brushed it off as office politics. But the next day, Madame Ifeoma had her own problem. Her biggest shop at Main Market, the one she had built for 10 years, was broken into overnight. Strangely, the security men swore that no one jumped the fence and nothing was forced open. Yet goods worth millions disappeared without a trace. She cried bitterly, not understanding what was happening. As these problems were rising like dark smoke, Chison kept living quietly among them, never changing her gentle behavior during the day. She still went to the tailoring shop, still helped in the kitchen, still greeted respectfully, but every night, after they slept, she continued her secret meetings at the gate. She would transform in her room, crawl out through the window with her human face and snail body, and join her fellow snails at the gate. Their leader would hiss and give her instructions.
confuse their house, scatter their peace. Their riches must dry like the harmattan sun. And so strange things continue to happen. The generator suddenly caught fire one evening for no reason, almost burning down the store. Madam Ifeoma started dreaming repeatedly of giant snails crawling round her bed, whispering her name. The couple began to argue over small issues. Things they usually ignored before now turned into heated quarrels. Their car broke down mysteriously on the highway twice in 1 week. Workers in their shops began to resign one after another, claiming they felt uncomfortable working there. Each day brought a new problem, and nobody suspected Chison. Why would they? She looked too innocent, a quiet girl from the market who spoke softly and worked hard. But one particular night changed everything. Around 2 a.m., Madam Ifeoma woke up again from a strange dream. This time, she heard movement inside the compound. It wasn't footsteps, it was a wet, crawling sound. Slowly, she crept to her window and peeked through the curtain. Her eyes widened in shock. At the fire near the gate, under the faint light, she saw dozens of giant snails gathered in a circle, their shells shining. And at the center of the circle was a half-human, half-snail figure with Chisom's face lifting her hands like a leader receiving power. Madam Ifeoma's mouth dried. She wanted to scream, but fear held her like chains. She covered her mouth with her hands and fell to the floor quietly, shivering. She couldn't believe what she saw. "Jesus, this girl," she whispered, trembling. By the time she gathered courage to look again, the compound was empty. No snails, no movement, just silence. From that night, Madam Ifeoma knew something terrible was living under her roof. But it was too late. The leader had told Chison to begin, and she had begun. Their house was slowly falling apart, financially, spiritually, and emotionally. The once joyful mansion at Hilltop Estate was becoming a house of coldness, whispers, and fear. And Chison continued to smile quietly in the daytime like nothing was wrong.
From the moment Madam Ifeoma saw Chisom's true form that night, sleep left her eyes. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that half-human, half-snail creature lifting its hands at the gate. She couldn't tell anyone, not even her husband. She feared he would laugh at her or think she had gone mad. But the house no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. Days turned into weeks and the problems grew worse. Mr. Chukwudi lost his job suddenly after a board meeting. A rumor he knew nothing about spread in the office and he was suspended without pay. He sat in the parlor every day with his head in his hands, confused and broken. Madam Ifeoma's shops continued to collapse mysteriously. Customers vanished. Her bank account kept draining as if someone was quietly sucking her wealth dry. Meanwhile, Chison moved around the house like a calm shadow, always smiling, always helpful, never raising suspicion. But at night, she led her snail coven fearlessly at the gate, their leader hissing instructions like a general commanding a soldier. "They are weak now. The house is cracking. Finish your work, Chison. Let darkness reign." One night, Madam Ifeoma decided she couldn't keep silent anymore. She called her husband after dinner. "Chukwudi," she began softly, "there's something strange happening in this house." He frowned. "Ifeoma, not again. We have problems already. I don't need superstitions now." She leaned forward. "Listen to me. I saw it with my eyes. I saw Chison at the gate, not as a girl, something else. She was half human, half snail." "Enough!" he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "This girl you're talking about has been nothing but good to us. Don't let frustration turn you against an innocent child." His anger silenced her. Tears filled her eyes. She realized Chisom's power was already dividing them. That night, Madam Ifeoma couldn't sleep. She knelt beside her bed and prayed in tears, calling on God to reveal the truth and give her strength. As she prayed, a cold wind blew into the room, even though the windows were shut. A faint hissing echoed from the hallway. She knew what it was. She grabbed her torchlight and quietly opened her door. The sign was there again, fresh snail slime shining on the floor. She followed it slowly, her hands shaking. The trail led to Chisom's window, and there, through the gap, she saw it clearly this time. Chisom's human face glowing faintly while her body twisted into the snail shape, the shell bursting out of her back. The girl slid through the window like something boneless, heading towards the gate. Madame Ifeoma's legs almost gave way, but she held the wall, forcing herself to stay quiet. She followed slowly to the gate, hiding behind the flower pots. There they were, dozens of snails circling under the night sky. Their leader hissed louder than ever. "This is the final night. Bring the house down completely. Their souls must wander. Their peace must end." Chison bowed. Her face was calm but wicked. "I will not fail, Great One." Madame Ifeoma gasped loudly without realizing it. All the snails turned at once. The leader's fiery eyes locked on her hiding place. "She sees us," it hissed. The meeting scattered like smoke. Chisom turned, half snail, half human. Her human face twisted in anger. She chased Madame Ifeoma across the compound, her slimy trail glistening behind her. Madame Ifeoma ran inside, slammed the door and fell on the floor crying. By morning, she told her husband everything again. But this time, before she could finish, Chukwudi packed his bag in frustration. "Ifeoma, I can't do this anymore. You're obsessed. This house is cursed. I'm leaving." She begged him, but he walked out and never came back. Their marriage collapsed. That evening, Madame Ifeoma gathered her courage and went to a pastor for help. They returned with prayers and strong faith, determined to cleanse the house. But when they entered the compound that night, Chisom was waiting at the veranda. She smiled gently like the harmless girl they once pitied, but her eyes were no longer human. As the pastor prayed, a loud hiss filled the air. Chisom's body began to twist in daylight. The shell burst out. Her face remained, but everything else turned into the monstrous snail form. The ground shook. Snails appeared from the walls and gates surrounding them. The pastor lifted his Bible and shouted prayers. Madame Ifeoma joined, screaming for mercy. The battle was fierce. The snails hissed. The wind blew. Windows shattered. Lights flickered. Then suddenly, as if struck by invisible fire, the leader screamed through Chisom's mouth. "She has exposed us. She has broken the silence." With a loud crack, Chisom's shell shattered. She fell to the ground, screaming like a wild creature. The snails scattered, vanishing into thin air. The cold wind stopped. Silence returned. When the dust settled, Chisom was gone. Not as a girl, not as a snail. Just gone, leaving behind a wet patch on the tiles. Mr. Chukwudi later returned home after some time. Through prayers and cleansing, peace slowly returned to their lives. They worked hard together and gradually recovered everything they had lost. Though the scars of the past remained, their home became a place of caution and wisdom. Madame Ifeoma spent the rest of her life warning others. A moral lesson: not every quiet face is innocent. Evil can hide behind soft eyes and gentle smiles. Be spiritually alert. Pray for wisdom before bringing strangers into your home. And above all, darkness may hide for a while, but it can never stand forever against light. The end.